Hello everyone, and welcome back to Black Cloud Travels. My name is Doris. This is day 3 of our travels on the Dempster Highway. We stayed at the Eagle Plains Complex last night, where we stopped at about lunchtime because of inclement weather. The roads were very slick and we were afraid of veering off the road and suffering some very major consequences. Unfortunately, the night before, a motorcyclist had slipped off the road down the mountainside and had to be airlifted out. Traveling conditions are not the best today, but we have to move forward and make the best of the situation. As you can see, the ground is pretty flat. There isn't a lot to see, but it is beautiful nevertheless. What is very surprising to me is that during the long stretches of abandoned terrain, from time to time you'll come across abandoned snowmobiles and dog sleds. It comes as a bit of a shock and surprise when you first see them, because they really aren't good omens. They tell a story of an adventure that did not have a happy ending. On our third day of travel, I'm still surprised to see the absence of animal wildlife. To me, this is a good thing. Not that I want to run into any bears or wolves, but I don't see any laying along the side of the road either. And to me, this is also a very good thing. As I was preparing this video, at one point I sat Frank down and we both watched this video together. I like to do this because I need his input. And he looked at this part and he said, "Doris, you're going way too slow." And I looked at him and I told him what I really felt, that this was a moment. There were no fireworks. The sky did not fall. The earth did not move. I was just presented with a pristine skyline of air, earth, and mountain. And at that moment, I experienced what it was like to take a deep breath at the Arctic Circle. And what better time to commemorate the moment with my very favorite instrument, the cello. Several episodes back, I referred to the fact that Frank forgot to bring along any music. And this did have a role to play in our travels in the days ahead. But before I can elaborate on that, I have to go back and tell you a story. Now, many years ago, I worked with a man, a very lovely man, and he was very well traveled, and I really enjoyed listening to his stories. One day I realized that I had not seen him for quite a while, at least a month. And not long after that, he appeared back on the work floor, and I had learned that he had been away for 5 weeks visiting Nepal. And I was very excited to hear this because I was very much into Everest with the IMAX movie, and I was very excited to hear what he had to say about it. So I approached him and I said, please tell me that you saw Everest." And he looked at me and he said, "Doris, we stayed at base camp." And I was thrilled to hear that. And I said, "Well, tell me, what did you take along to listen to while you were looking at Everest?" And he kind of shook his head and looked down. And I said, "Tell me, you took something to listen to while you were looking at Everest." And he said, "I really don't want to tell you." And I said, "Now you've got to tell me. I got to know what you were listening to as you looked up at Mount Everest from base camp, no less." And he said, "Doris, it was Shania Twain." And I looked at him and I said, "Shania Twain? How could you? Who takes Shania Twain to listen to on Mount Everest?" And he said, I know. It was the only CD I had, and that's because I forgot it in the CD case." So I looked at him and I said, that's really not good." He said, "I know, my partners that I was traveling with, they really didn't care for it either." But then he leaned over to me and he whispered in my ear, he said, "But boy, the Sherpas sure loved it." Not long after that, I promised myself that would never happen to me. I would never find myself in a profound space with nothing to listen to. Okay, so 20 some odd years later, here we were in the Arctic with virtually no music to listen to, except for that which I had on my cell phone. Frank suggested that I slow down the speed to normal. He wanted me to do this so that you could see the road conditions. These are Yukon roads. The Yukon government obviously does not put a lot of thought or effort into keeping them in a tolerable state. Now, when the road is wet, the mud is thick and slippery, and almost worse, when it's dry, it hardens into very deep ruts that are torturous to climb in and out of. The interesting thing is that as soon as we cross into the Northwest Territories, the roads are much better. It was explained to us that the Northwest Territories are very eager for tourism, and that will not happen unless they can get to Northwest Territories. So basically, Northwest Territories is putting continual money and upkeep and construction into keeping the roads at a tolerable state. What was incredible was watching how very different they were as soon as you crossed the lines. Now, on the side of the mountains, that is snow and ice you see, and the temperatures are cool. Now, I'd also like to point out to you that there are continual frost heaves. Fortunately, they're marked by the construction signs or orange flags, like I mentioned in earlier videos. I'm looking forward to seeing some pingos. I don't think I'll see them until I get closer to Tuktoyaktuk, and I'll be sure to point them out. Wikipedia describes the Pingo as a mound of earth-covered ice mainly found in the Arctic and subarctic that can reach up to 70 meters in height and up to 600 meters in diameter. Now check out that road. Isn't it lovely? The Northwest Territories has made an effort to keep the road covered with gravel, and it's very obvious by the smoother ride we're having. It's better for the truck, it's better for our spine, it's better for our mood. So this is a welcome break. From time to time you can see machines, men working on the road, and you can see mounds of gravel at the side in storage, ready to be put to use. For lack of a better name, I will call this the gravel grinding machine. Thank you, gravel grinding machine. We appreciate your efforts. One more thing that we wanted to point out is that the road itself is significantly wider. This makes for easier passing and a more relaxing drive. Now, in our last episode, I told a story about how we met a young man during our first night on the Dempster highway. He pulled up in front of us in his little Corolla and got out and started making his dinner. I was quite amazed with him because he was traveling alone. He was obviously very independent, and he was traveling in his Corolla, sleeping in his Corolla, cooking in his Corolla, and it's hard for me to imagine that kind of strength. So Frank went out to talk to him, and we learned he was from Manitoba, and he was having a great time. Okay, so now here we are about to board the second ferry, and who pulls up beside us? Yes, it is that same young man. On his car, around the outside of the roof, he had tacked some Himalayan prayer flags, and I was absolutely delighted. So at one point, I opened the door and I introduced myself to him, and I mentioned how much I was impressed by his Himalayan prayer flags. And he said, "Oh, do you like them, really? I got them in Nepal." And I looked at him and I said, "You got them in Nepal? You've been in Nepal, really?" And he nodded, yes, he had been. And I asked him, I said, "Please tell me that you saw Everest." And he nodded his head and he said, yes, he had seen Everest from the plane. So I was quite amazed at the sight of this little Corolla, prayer flags tacked along the outside. They were bright, they were beautiful, they were happy, and they were also very, very dirty. Well, that being said, we finally said goodbye and parted ways. Eventually, we got off the boat. I never saw him again. Okay, so here we are approaching Inuvik. Now, according to Wikipedia, the population as of the 2016 census was 3,243 people. This is a decrease from the 2011 census of 6.4%, and this is due to economic conditions. So here we are in Inuvik, and I find this very exciting. I just love coming to a town like this for the first time. We're passing by the post office, the hospital, and thanks to the motorhome experiment, I was able to familiarize myself with this place. Before coming here, we're coming up to the Igloo Church. It's a Catholic church. I would have very much liked to have gone in there. Okay, we're coming up to the grocery store. It's a city just like yours and mine, except this is a lot further north. So here we are coming up to our campground, again introduced to us by the YouTube channel Motorhome Experiment. Thank you to them. It's always nice to know where you're going, what it's going to look like. I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this episode of Traveling the Dempster Highway, Black Cloud Travels. I invite you to join us again next time.